Let's talk to Alan Tolhurst, Chief Reporter at Politics Home. Alan, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Happy Friday. You know, the subject just doesn't go away, does it? We still see Keir Starmer in Poland today. He's going to be talking to them about tackling people smuggling gangs. It's a Europe-wide problem. What is Kemi Badenoch going to offer by way of some kind of, poison pill to stop people from coming? Because, of course, the Tories didn't stop them from coming all the time they were in. I mean, funnily enough, I was listening to one of the shows on Talk last night. I think it was Kevin O'Sullivan's show. And as recently as something like 2018, the number of people who came across the channel in small boats was something like 25. I mean, it was tiny.
Yeah.
And then it was a couple of hundred, and then it suddenly ballooned into what it is now. And nobody seems to know what to do about it.
Right, yeah, and it was a curious speech by Kemi Badenoch, because obviously, when you're leader of the opposition, your whole job is to try and drag attention away from the government and onto you. Right. And you have to kind of say what it is that you would do. And she's kind of made it clear that she's not going to come up with specific policies for quite a long time, perhaps not even next year, but until the year after. So therefore, she drags sort of like the lobby to the speech and sort of criticises the government, but then doesn't really have any policies of her own. And like you say, certainly not this kind of magic bullet that's going to solve things. And it was kind of a rehash, really. I mean, she would not thank me for saying this, but a bit of kind of continuity Sunakism, really, kind of a rehash of the arguments that the Tories were making at the 2024 general election. And she didn't really offer any sort of solutions, just criticism. And I think that's a sort of opposition policy that gets people riled up, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose on the one hand you've got Kemi Badenoch who doesn't say very much of anything, and then you've got Robert Jenrick, who's often accused of going too far and saying things which are, deliberately kind of incendiary and might be considered to be, borderline problematic, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she's basically saying migrants who refuse to embrace British culture should find somewhere else to live. Well, fine, but how do you even define that, and what does that mean, and how do you make them find somewhere else to live if they're already here?
Right, what's the specific test for not integrating and stuff? And is there a sliding scale? Is there a point system?
Yeah.
Can you appeal? Can you take the test again? And what happens? Is it a one-time thing? You get immediately deported, or would you go to some halfway house?
And apparently there is a test. I mean, I was talking to some people yesterday about this, and people were ringing in. Lots of people messaged us as well. Many of them had taken the test because we had a commentator on who said the test was really difficult. It's actually not particularly difficult, apparently, and many people pass it quite happily with flying colours, and not that many people fail it. So yeah, apparently there already is a test, and once you've passed it, you're in.
Right, yeah, exactly. So it's a strange thing, and I think that's I think that, both the government are finding this at the moment, that there isn't kind of a silver bullet to fixing this. You can't just say we're going to smash the gangs and actually prevent people from being able to come across the channel in the same way the previous government talked about it. They obviously came up with a deterrent system that didn't seem to it wasn't seem to be deterring people before it got going. So therefore, I think it's very difficult for both sides to come up with something that they know is going to work, because both sides have had a go at it and they've not managed to bring the numbers down. But certainly with Badenoch, it was this speech that was meant to be kind of diagnosing all of the kind of the problems, but it just seemed like kind of a little bit impotent, really, because it didn't have on the back of it an alternative to what the government is doing.
I mean, certainly people would agree, I suspect, if we asked them, with what she said about our country is our home, it is not a hotel. But one of the things that people get really wound up about is the fact that there are many hotels occupied by many illegal migrants who are getting paid to be here, who are getting shelter, who are getting food, who are getting the ability to live a life which many other people can't live, and they're not being deported, even if they end up finding themselves on the wrong side of an asylum claim. And so this government, which keeps talking about wanting to deport more people, is also failing at that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was under the Conservatives that that exponential use of hotels, spiraled up. I think by the time the Tories left office, it was something like £6 to £8 million a day being used on hotels, and so therefore, this government obviously inherited that and has been trying to bring it down. Instead, they've ended up having to open some new hotels in places like Frodsham, where I grew up. There's been a massive stink about the one main hotel in that town being opened and used for this purpose. But yeah, I think one of the main problems I've spoken to people who work in the Home Office is that processing is so slow, to be able to get people back. places like Greece that obviously have a similar issue with small boat crossings. Their officers there, they process something like 50, 60 claims a week. Many of them they deny people. I think in the UK, some people, they process something like 1 or 2 claims
I know,
a week.
it's bonkers, isn't it?
So therefore, if you've got all thousands of people coming over, there is inevitably going to be this backlog, and you have to find somewhere to put them. We've been very slow at building sort of temporary accommodation, all that kind of stuff. So therefore, the only place you can use is hotels, and we end up in this terrible situation where people are just waiting around, not having their case decided either way.
No, exactly right. Let's move on to Sir Keir Starmer. He was off in the Ukraine yesterday, basically promising to give them £4.5 billion. I mean, for a man who claims not to have any money, he's quite profligate with some of it whenever he goes to somewhere like Ukraine. We signed a new 100-year deal with them, some kind of partnership, which nobody knew about until he went there. You know, some people yesterday on this show were showing signs of dismay that he might have actually mentioned at some point in the past month or so that he was going to enter into this partnership and he was going to guarantee them a whole bunch of money, because surely we should be able to know about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's going to get a stout ticking off from Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, for not announcing this in the chamber in the House of Commons before it was announced. But I think clearly it's part of kind of a coordinated decision by kind of Western allies that aren't America to try and kind of keep putting this support in, because there is a fear, I think, that when Donald Trump becomes president next week, that he will put pressure on Ukraine and Zelensky to come up with some sort of settlement with Russia. He's talked about wanting to end the war in a single day. So I think that Western allies are trying to add a lot of support to try and steady kind of Zelensky's hand so that he isn't forced into making a kind of a settlement that's not in Ukraine's interest.
No, quite. And today's in Poland, as I say, talking about a great many things, including sort of, you know, Western Europe security, and then he'll presumably go to Davos, so he won't be back for a while, will he?
No,
he's a tour of Europe. Very nice too.
Yeah, he's racking up the air miles, certainly. If he needs his Avios points, I think it'll be... and then if he's taking
judging by the way he was dressed yesterday, I presume he's taking his snowboard to go snowboarding when he gets to...
Well, if you're going to go to Davos, Mike, you've got to have the full experience, haven't you? If you're going to get to that inner circle in Davos, you've got to pay the £1,000 and thousands and go skiing, certainly, as well. Yeah, it's people always complain about being Prime Minister, how it's such a terrible job. You know, there are some benefits, I'm sure.
It's really not that bad. I'll tell you what I find interesting today. The most interesting story for me this morning is all about Lord Hermer KC, the Attorney General, because he's becoming quite a controversial figure. You know, he came into the sort of firmament, if you like, a few weeks ago, maybe back end of last year, because of some of the people that he'd represented in his private law practice, who might have been considered to be sort of, you know, borderline, not welcome in this country sort of people. We've now got him representing Gerry Adams, and he was asked a question the other day as to how much he was paid by Gerry Adams, and he rather stupidly made out that he couldn't remember, didn't know. Even if I did know, I'm not sure I would tell you. But he's obviously front and centre of this new reframing of the law in Northern Ireland, which may make it possible for Gerry Adams to claim compensation. It now turns out, according to the Times this morning, that he was paid £30,000 for representing Gerry Adams last year.
Yeah, and he doesn't really talk about how exactly he was paid. It is very interesting, and I suppose I think that's one of the difficulties in if you hire a very experienced, long-standing lawyer, you will, if you look through their client list, you will inevitably, that's the job of these kind of high-powered cases, is to represent all sorts of different people, but now to make him kind of a poacher turned gamekeeper by now making the Attorney General, I think there's going to be a fair few kind of skeletons in his closet, and I think there's going to be a few more stories about this. He's talked about the stuff around the Afghanistan inquiry, that very tainted kind of legal process that happened as well. So yeah, I think there's going to be some definitely some tricky questions, and clearly as a lawyer, people you represent all sorts of different people. That's not really meant to kind of give firm or favour.
You do, but I mean, if you look through his list of clients, you don't find any right wingers. Funnily enough, you just find a load of sort of revolutionaries and people linked to terrorist groups. But I wonder,
their money's exactly the same as anyone else's. else's, Mike, I
Well,
suppose.
it is, but I mean, as I say, if he had chosen sort of equally, that would be one thing. But he doesn't seem to have done, a bit like Keir Starmer's own law career, in which he represented far more people who you might consider to be on the sort of anti-British side of the divide than anything else. But I wonder, given the week that Starmer has had, where he's lost Tulip Sadiq, the third woman who's had to leave his government, whether this guy might be the next one to fall on his sword, because I think this is one of those sort of slow burn scandals that while it may not be necessarily untenable, just doesn't look very good.
No, it doesn't. I think it's less likely to come up because the fact that Attorney General is, although it's a cabinet level position, is pretty much the most kind of obscure of it. I think, and also as well, because he's not an MP, he's a member of the House of Lords. I think it's not necessarily quite the same. But yeah, I think that there will probably be a drip of these kind of stories. As I said, when you go through a career, 30, 40 plus year career of a lawyer, there's going to be probably a fair few more stories. I'm sure papers like the Times and others will be having their legal correspondents digging through every kind of clipping they've ever had that mentions him, and I think there'll probably be a few more stories as we go into next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Mike Amesbury pleaded guilty yesterday to assault up in court in the north of England. The Runcorn and Helsby MP said it's nothing. He said basically, you will not threaten your MP again, will you? You effing soft lad, which is a very Liverpudlian sort of thing to say. But basically, I assume there's going to have to be a by-election now, isn't there?
Well, interestingly, because a recall petition is only triggered in a particular set of circumstances. So if he was to be given a custodial sentence or a suspended sentence, then a recall petition could be triggered. Yeah. Obviously, if I think he was given a sentence of like a year, then he would just be vacated as an MP, and there would be an automatic by-election. Right. But I think the fact is that he pleaded guilty early. It's a first offence. It's a single charge.
Surely he should face the full force of the law, shouldn't he?
He does, but I think if you listen to what the judge said yesterday, the judge basically said that the full spectrum of sentencing options are still on the table, which I think start at a community order and go up to a custodial sentence. So I think there is still a chance that he might end up getting a community order. But the fact that he's been dropped by Labour, the whip was suspended when he admitted that when this first came out. Right. He's obviously not going to be let back in as a Labour MP. He may decide to step down, but I do think
he shouldn't be allowed to be an MP after this, surely to God.
Well, look, I mean, punching a constituent, it didn't do John Prescott's career at any harm.
Well, no, but John Prescott was attacked by the guy before he punched him. As far as we know, this guy was not attacked by the guy. He was having an argument with him, which is completely different. And he's also pleaded guilty to assault, which John Prescott never did.
No, exactly. I think it's very unlikely that Amesbury's career will continue much beyond this, but we'll have to wait until the sentencing to know exactly kind of the particular mechanism that will be used. Reform are kind of, chomping at the bit, essentially, to get involved in this. Obviously, they've been already campaigning up there. I think they were a long way behind Labour at the election last year, but obviously they'll see this as a big opportunity to be able to take another scalp from Labour, given everything else that's been going on.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Good to talk to you, Alan. Thank you very much indeed. Alan Tolhurst there. Wouldn't it be extraordinary if this man, this so-called Labour MP, former Labour MP, Mike Amesbury, did not get fired from his job at the Houses of Parliament? This is a bloke who punched the constituency repeatedly in the face, even after he was on the ground, right? And started attacking him for no apparent reason, other than the fact that he didn't like what the guy was saying. Now, the idea that he will not face the full force of the law after what we saw last summer, after those riots, when Keir Starmer wanted to lock everybody up, even though it was a first offence, even though there was no violence involved, even though some Facebook posts were made, is absolutely another indication of two-tier justice for two-tier Keir. Two-tier, never here, wish you weren't here, Keir. Two-tier justice. I'm sorry, it shouldn't be going on. This guy should be out of a job.